Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining Congregation Rodef Shalom and Valley Beit Midrash for this pre-Shavuot class series with Rabbi Marc Gitler and Dr. Austin Swafford. Tonight's topic is revelation, experience, or ongoing process. That question is a doorway into Shavuot itself. Revelation is often described as something that happened once at Sinai. But Jewish tradition also invites us to ask whether revelation is something people continue to experience, interpret, and participate in. Before we begin, we'd like to welcome everyone joining us here in person and everyone participating on Zoom. We are very grateful to Congregation Rodef Shalom and Valley Beit Midrash for helping make this learning possible. If you're not familiar, Congregation Rodef Shalom is a vibrant, egalitarian Jewish community here in Denver, rooted in meaningful learning, soulful prayer, and a deep commitment to building an inclusive and supportive community. Valley Beit Midrash is a global center for learning and action, rooted in Jewish ethics and committed to improving lives through Torah learning, social action, and leadership development. VBM Denver brings that mission into this local community by creating opportunities for meaningful Jewish engagement across backgrounds, denominations, and traditions. That partnership makes this series especially meaningful. Rodef Shalom and Valley Beit Midrash share a commitment to rigorous, accessible, pluralistic Jewish learning that speaks to the question of our time. This class is part of a larger pre-Shavuot and Shavuot learning journey. Tonight, this series begins with the discussion of Revelation, and in 2 weeks, we'll continue with the Torah study, discovery or creation conversation. And finally, as Shavuot approaches, we will explore whether the events of Sinai were a marriage contract or something else as we entered the covenant with Adonai. If you haven't yet registered for that great series on Shavuot, as well as many other excellent classes, please scan the link here or visit this URL to register for the dinner and the rest of the evening's events. Now on to the main event. When people hear the word revelation, they might imagine thunder, lightning, tablets, and commandments, and a single overwhelming moment at Sinai. But Jewish sources are much more complicated and much more interesting than this simple view. Tonight, we are pleased to have on hand our co-leaders, Rabbi Marc Gitler and Dr. Austin Swafford. Rabbi Gitler is a senior educator at Valley Beit Midrash. He is known for his engaging and dynamic approach to teaching and Jewish learning. A Wexner Fellow ordained at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, he previously served as rabbi of the East Denver Orthodox Synagogue and remains an active presence in the Denver Jewish community. He's also the founder of Fast for Feast and is dedicated to making Jewish learning meaningful and accessible to all. Dr. Austin Swafford is a scientist, educator, and community leader known for his interdisciplinary approach to Jewish learning. He teaches adult education at Congregation Rodef Shalom, where he brings together Jewish text, education, and science to inform his Jewish learning and those of his students. Together, Rabbi Gitler and Dr. Swafford invite this community not to simply learn information, but to enter a live question. What does it mean to receive a revelation?
We have this custom, which is from the 16th century, from Rav Yosef Karo, to stay up all night of Shavuot and study Torah is done here beautifully. And the question is, where does that custom come from? And there are those who say that it comes from a Midrash because the Jews slept late on the morning of the giving of the Torah. So to ensure that we wouldn't sleep late, we stay up all night, which I guess precludes the idea of sleeping late. I think it's probably a post facto explanation of the custom, but cute to mention today. At least me, I'm very tired. So, Austin, do you want to just talk about sort of framework or what we're going to try to do and look at some of the sources and go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I did that, actually, I was going to ask about that tradition. Do you think it was to help soften us up so that you're slightly delusional when you see these things on the mountain? They're a little more impressive. Was that the intent?
I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good question. But what I will say about that's very interesting is Rav Yosef Karo is a very intriguing figure. He's known mostly for the Shulchan Aruch, the set table, the book that was an attempt to codify halakha, codify Jewish law. But in addition to that, he was also a mystic. He was part of the circle of the Kabbalists in Swafford in the late 16th century. And he's noted for something very interesting, which is very much related to things that we will get to in our classes, which is that he was noted for having something called a Maggid. A Maggid is not just a storyteller. The word Maggid, like the word Haggadah, means a storyteller, somebody who tells stories, somebody who teaches lessons. But he was a Maggid in that he had some sort of otherworldly, prophetic, the opposite of a demon, an angel that spoke to him and taught him Torah, which he then writes a book. One of his books is called the Maggid Shiurim, if I remember, which is the book of the lessons that he derived from this, we'll call it a supernatural figure teaching him. It's hard to, and I don't remember the origin of this custom, and to be frank, I don't remember if it was he who originated or was somebody in his general circle, but either way. So let's get started with these sources. What we want to do tonight is talk about the event of Sinai, talk about Har Sinai. And, if at some point somebody wants to make a comment or ask a question, please go ahead at any time. But we have here in the Hebrew and the English, the Sinai experience is one that is also seen as being supernatural. It's not just God speaking, but it comes with all sorts of other stuff. Also, you want to describe what are some of the other things that are said there?
Yes. So looking at source 1, and I've sent out the source sheet, and we'll include that in this recording as well. We're looking at here Exodus chapter 19, starting at verse 16. And the scene that's being set here is very much one of something that is beyond this plane of existence. You're seeing, as the dawn is breaking, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud and loud blasts. And I think growing up, I grew up in New Orleans, and I'm thinking of that sort of right before the hurricane as things start moving around and you have this transition from one to the next. Or if you've ever had the pleasure of going through the eye of a storm, as I did as a child, you walk out in the middle and it's beautiful sunshine right up to the sky, and a mile away you can see things traveling. And that's just at least for me how I imagine this, that you're watching these tornadoes and moving debris and this whole mountain shaking, and there you are in the eye of it, about 10 count or something profound.
Yeah, the event is destabilizing. It's overwhelming and it's destabilizing. Right here you see the thunder and the lightning, like you're saying, and the horns and the loud blasts and smoke and fire, the smoke of a kiln. And another verse that we have here, which is not on the page, but it says that v'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, and all the people saw, unless it is here and I'm mistaken, it talks about the people seeing the sounds.
Yes, it'll be in just a moment.
So, okay, so it's this otherworldly experience. Go ahead, keep going.
No, absolutely. What we were hoping to provoke here in terms of a discussion really is, what would this mean? You've stayed up, you've woken up late, I guess, if you're there at the time. You've woken up late, you're rushing to this glorious sight, you're trying to figure out what's going on. And one of the things that we'll be exploring, one of the first themes, is really what happened there and how are the people feeling? Because we're going to see that they have a number of peculiar descriptions of what they do. And I'm going to suggest that we actually hop on to source 2, if you're all right with it.
That's great.
So moving on to source 2, which is in the next chapter of Exodus, we have exactly what you were saying. All the people witnessed the thunder and the lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. And the question that Rashi raises in his commentary on it is, what does it mean by all the people saw here? Do you want to explore that further? I'm sure you're much more familiar with Rashi than I am.
I'm not.
You're not a Rashi aficionado?
So far from it. But if we look at that sort of that second Rashi for a moment, and the second one in the large box there, we'll just look what Rashi says. The second one, we'll just read it in the English. They saw that which should be heard, something which is impossible to see on any other occasion. And to me, what's important about that and what's relevant about that is that second phrase, it's not something that is possible at any other time. This is a sui generis, unique experience, something that is completely different than anything else. And part of what's interesting about it, on other layers and levels as well is that we don't have great descriptions. This is not the only prophetic event in the Torah. There's many a prophetic event in the Torah. This is the only sort of public event of a prophecy in the Torah. Now, God talks about speaking to Moshe person to person. Other prophets see dreams or they're put to sleep. It's not a natural process. Here, the Jewish people are akin to Moshe. They're awake, maybe barely awake, but they're awake. But the process is what occurs is something that is completely different than anything else of any other time period. That's the way it is described. And that's part of, at least to me, what's interesting is Rashi is picking up on seeing what is usually heard. And we know the phrase, seeing is believing. So maybe part of that is you heard it, but it's more than just hearing it. The experience is greater than just the experience of hearing alone, the multi-sensory experience. And maybe that to me, that's a very interesting thing about it being different. And perhaps, and if you want to look at Rashi, this last one, this 19, it frightens the people. He said it is destabilizing. It's an encounter with something that is so great and incredible that it is terrifying.
It's too bad we don't have Rabbi Shmuley on hand to talk to us a little bit, because in my mind, as I was reviewing this, the topic of synesthesia comes up.
Okay.
Are you familiar with synesthesia?
No, I don't know that phrase.
So
I know anesthesia.
There you go. Synesthesia is where you actually see colors when you hear sounds. And there's a sort of a high convergence of people who have perfect pitch, and then this extra, actually, optical nerve stimulation that's occurring when they hear sounds. So they'll hear a C and say, oh, that's a blue. And they'll hear an A and say, oh, that's a green or a red. And it's not a conserved color palette, but they actually experience sound in color form. And if my memory is correct, they were able to simulate this in people using magnetic stimulation. So you put a magnet on the brain and kind of funk it from the side, give it a little jostle, and you could actually invoke something like this, where a sound was now corresponding to a color. And part of what's going on in your brain when this is happening is that the wires are crossed. Literally, the neurons are sending signals across these different neural pathways so that you're hearing sound. Sorry, you're seeing sound. And for me, that's what I was imagining, in addition to the cacophony here, is almost this, it's so intense that it's overwhelming your normal brain chemistry to where you are experiencing it with all of your senses in a way.
When you come back to my house and you're at my Shabbat table and I'll be trying to sing some Zmirot and my kids will be saying how terrible I sound, you'll understand as to why that phrase, I will not even remember the word to make myself feel better. But the Jewish people are terrified. They're overwhelmed. The experience is beyond what people could recognize, and it's a very intriguing scientific point that you point out, and they move backwards, they move away, right? The Rashi here cites a Midrash of an exaggeration that they move back 12 miles, a very far amount. I would imagine the number 12 there is being used because of the 12 tribes of Israel, and saying like everybody was part of it. That's why they're moving 12 miles. Everybody is moving back and they are trembling. They are scared, which is it's a very difficult process that they go through at this time, destabilizing, fearful. They're worried and they're scared.
We have a Thursday class in this same room where we are walking through the Torah week by week. We're a little bit behind the Parshiot. That's, I think, okay, given that there's a lot of rules in this section. We're still back in the narrative of Exodus. And the setting of the scene just before this is really, God is making it pretty clear through both words and actions that God wants the people to know what he is, what he can do. And in a chapter or two just before this, 3 chapters before this, God has just wiped out all of the Egyptians in the Sea of Reeds, and has really proven to these people who he's pulled out of Egypt that he can do what he means, says what he means and does it.
Right. The threat is only a good threat. Not that this is a threat, but a threat is only a good threat if you've carried it out in the past.
And there's this notion that the people were unfamiliar with God over those 400 years of slavery, that it had been beaten out of them. And so I think as well in this moment, as you have this sort of overwhelming spectacle, I'm intrigued by the fact that not only did they back up, but they also ask, and I realize the first part of the Exodus 20 is cut off in the source sheet here, so I'll amend that before this goes online. But they ask Moses to mediate. They say, well, this is too much. We will do, and then we will hear, which we'll come to in a moment. And then Moshe, you take over from here. And I do wonder if there's a missed opportunity there. To your point, almost all the prophecy is private, but this is a very public event. And did the people give up something when they introduced Moses as a mediator?
Yeah, it's an intriguing question on many levels. On one level, we know what happens when Moses is absent later on, the golden calf story.
Mhm.
People, they don't know what to do without Moshe. They say, Ki Moshe ish einenu yodea mehayalo. The man Moses, we do not know what happened to him, and try to bring in other intermediaries to talk to and to communicate with God with. The idea of then bringing, they're used to having order and structure dictated to them from the outside. We talked about the lack of God in Egypt, and they don't know God's name. They've heard, they remember, there are some prophecies, there are some ideas that they're supposed to come out of Egypt, but that's so far forgotten. And what is the name of God, and what does God represent, and what does God say? And Moshe is really their be all and end all to all of this. And moving from the oppressive Egyptians to this structure, not that God is trying to oppress them, but the way it comes out may be a traumatic experience for these people. It's overwhelming and too much. And even if they are willing and want to do this, may be too much for them.
And as we're focusing on the theme of what is revelation in the context of this encounter at Sinai, and one of the questions that sort of sparked as I was reading this was that number 3 here on our source sheet, which is, does revelation primarily give hidden information or just change the way you see it? In other words, God, we know, is about to, through Moshe, give a whole set of commandments and rules and laws and regulations and all sorts of things. But there's also the idea that God is revealing God's self to the people in this moment. And that's a different kind of revelation. Because in my mind, there's one thing where we read over and over with whether it's Hagar seeing suddenly, how did she not see a well that's sitting in front of her? And it's the idea that it's revealed to her, the veil's lifted from her eyes. And in a way, if we're seeing this breakdown of the barriers between God and people, it's almost like the veil of reality is lifting for a moment so that you're seeing God in raw form. And it's just something we were speaking earlier today about communing with nature, with some of the commentary from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, and that idea that when you're in nature, you're separated from, certainly the house of worship, but you're still able to commune with God by lifting that veil of nature and seeing and feeling like a part of God.
And what's important and unique is not just, again, the destabilizing, the whatever word it was that you use that rhymes with anesthesia,
synesthesia, yeah,
synesthesia, synesthesia. But that's what's important about this event. And I'm not saying anything unique or fresh or novel or new with it, is that the revelation of Sinai, what's most important about it is not the content of the Aseret HaDibrot, not the content of the 10 utterances or what's mistranslated as the 10 commandments, but rather how it was done. The fact that it was given by God to the Jewish people with this revelation, with the thunder and the lightning, and it was the experience that is more significant than the actual mitzvot. The rabbis discuss this, and actually in the Talmud, Masechet Brachot talks about how there were those who wanted to say the Aseret HaDibrot every single day, and there were others who disagreed with the practice because people would say, oh, that was the only thing that God gave the Jewish people, or that you're saying by saying it every day, you're saying that is more important than other parts of the Torah. But it's not. The mitzvah of not wearing wool and linen together is just as binding as honor your mother and father. As strange, I'm not saying it's as important, as significant as
Avoiding polyglotton.
yes. I'm not saying that it's something that should be on the top of your mind at all times, like honoring your parents, especially speaking to the younger generation with that. But in terms of a tzivui, a commandment that we are bound by, the commandments are all the same. It is the method in which this is given. The medium is the message here, is the difference here. And so Moses comes, in a sense, it's a missed opportunity, but is it also partially a missed opportunity because the people are not ready for that opportunity? It's not something that they can behold. And yet God, interesting question, God does it for them anyway.
Sure.
Even though we would assume an omnipotent, an omnipresent, omniscient God would know that they're not ready for it, but does it anyway.
Yeah, that's tricky because it's one of the things we'll explore in a minute is about the coercive aspect of this, right? Was this a consensual revelation or was it forced upon the people? They didn't sign up. I signed one of my kids has a fun run at school. I had to sign a waiver for them to participate in the fun run. Seems odd to give them permission to have fun, but that's the modern age. But there was no, hey, sign this waiver before we go out in the desert. I promise you're gonna what you see when we get out there. In fact, if anything, the people are complaining constantly for the first 40 years, let's say.
Yeah, in terms of your question 3, and if anybody wants to give a comment over there, Revelation, I think here is less about the particulars of the information and more about the experience. And every religion has experiential aspects to it. You're supposed to go up to the temple 3 times a year. Once every 7 years, we have this ceremony, the Hakel, and everybody gathers there. And in the Talmud discussion says, I understand why the adults go. Why do the kids go? It's for the experience. It's not for them to hear the Torah and actually, it's not a pedagogical experience, it's not an intellectual experience, it's not a learning experience. It is a experience. It's a, I don't know exactly how to say it. It's the people who went to Woodstock, not to hear Jimi Hendrix, but to be with maybe they thought it was going to be 50,000 people, not 300,000 or 500,000 people. I don't know exactly how many were there. It's a long time ago at this point. I don't even know if you can mention Woodstock anymore.
I don't know. I was going to say it's a great album, though, the Are You Experience? But it's reminding me, there's a story, and I wish I'm blanking right now on the name of the person who tells it, but it's a post-Holocaust story where this man basically traveled, I think it was the streets of Prague, if I'm getting my stories not mixed up, playing an organ grinder. And every so often he would play a Jewish song to see which kids who had been squirreled away or separated from their parents would remember the tune. They may have no other connection to their Judaism, but when they perked up hearing this Jewish melody, he could then go engage them and try to bring these people back into the fold that otherwise would have just been babies when they were maybe taken away. And I think that's speaking to that. It might not be in your brain or your mind,
but in the
in your soul. Yes, exactly. So
wonderful. Yeah. So it's a fascinating question that we have. And why don't we continue on to the next page?
Sure. Yeah. So why don't you take this one, Exodus 24:7. I think you would probably disagree with the translation here, and I think you should, right?
No, that's okay. I don't need to. There's a lot in here in terms of the 24/7. God, he takes the record of the covenant and reads it aloud to the people. And they say, all that Hashem has spoken, we will faithfully do. Was it there that I would have a problem with the translation? I don't know.
I think if you have the look at the Hebrew, right, it's we will do and then we will hear, right?
Hashem, we will faithfully do. Yeah, I wonder why the translation, or if it got cut off. Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. All that Hashem has spoken, we will do, v'nishma, and we will listen. Now, what that phrase,
that's the more classic kind of phrasing. I'm realizing in this English they've erased the problem.
Yeah, I don't understand that. That has nothing to do with being genderly sensitive, I don't think, as far as I know. Now, this actually comes a few chapters later. There's a question that's asked in regards to this chapter. We're reading from chapter 19, chapter 20 before. This is about 4 chapters later. It comes after a series of laws are given. Is this something that happens earlier? It's generally understood that this occurs actually prior to the revelation at Sinai. What's important about it is the order, like you are saying. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. It's a sense of blind loyalty, which you may have had with your children up to the age of 3, if you're lucky. I don't know, 4, 2, 6 months. I'm not going to ask the question as to why. I trust completely in you, God. You took us out of Egypt. We are not being beaten. We are not being whipped. We are not suffering. People are not dying. We have our own freedom. So we will do that which you tell us to do, because there is a sense that we believe that you are benevolent and have our best interests in mind. And it's something that people do at times in their lives, where we put our trust into somebody and we say, here is my money, manage it. And I believe that you are an honest person. Either you pass some tests or whatever it might be. I think that you have my best interests in mind. Sometimes it's a mistake. Sometimes it works out okay. But with God, we hope that it would work out okay. So that is seemingly in the Torah what the Jews do. And then if you want to continue, there's a lengthy source that we have here in terms of a different understanding of what happens at Sinai. And maybe we'll just read part of it. You want to read part of it?
Sure. So the Gemara cites an additional homiletic interpretations on the topic of the revelation at Sinai. In this William Davidson edition, instead of sticking with the brevity of the Talmud, it tends to inject a lot of words to give us some context. So the Torah says, and Moshe brought forth the people from the camp to meet God, and they stood at the lowermost part of the mount. Rabbi Azbini Bar Chasa said the Jewish people actually stood beneath the mountain. And the verse teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, overturned the mountain above the Jews like a tub, and said to them, if you accept the Torah, excellent, and if not, there will be your burial. Rav Asad Bar Yaakov said, from here there is substantial caveat to the obligation to fulfill Torah. The Jewish people can claim that they were coerced into accepting the Torah, so it is therefore not binding. Rav Asad, as it is written. I'm going to pause there for a second to get your initial input on this imagery. And this idea of reaffirming it with Hashverosh.
There's a lot to say about it. Technically, what the Talmud is doing there with the Achashverosh Megillat Esther is a time of sort of a transition for the Jewish people. The time of the giving of the Torah is a time of what's called Nisim Nigalim, revealed miracles, explicit miracles, the revelation of Sinai, the splitting of the sea, the water turning to blood, right, et cetera, et cetera. The time of Achashverosh, we move into a different type of time period there prior to or at the beginning of the Second Temple period, according to tradition, the time that revelation ends, the time that these sort of explicit miracles change. And so what the rabbis are doing is they're taking a verse that the Jewish people, it says, kimu, that they accepted, and that they are accepting the Torah not under duress and not coerced to do so later on, when that type of relationship is no longer there, when the miracles that God does are not going to be explicit and obvious and everybody's going to see them. They are a miracle that God is in the background, and it's much more of the Torah belongs, as it were, to the Jewish people. It's not this coercion of God. So what the Talmud is doing there is, what it's saying is, this tradition, there is this tradition which goes against that which it says seemingly directly in the text, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, that the Jews were not willing participants, but they were forced. And you could try to put the two together, right? You could hear somebody say, of course, I'll do that, honey, whatever you want. And then maybe you dig a little deeper, or maybe you hear a week later, or a month later, or a year later, whatever it is, that this person in this relationship, whether it be the wife, is the way that, or whether it be the husband, was an oppressed, coerced, almost enslaved person. And so you could understand it here to a certain extent. The main way of reading the text, again, is the Jews were free, and they said, we trust you, God, blindly, and we will do. And this is saying, no, they were coerced. You could, again, try to put it together and say maybe they weren't really coerced, but did they really have the freedom to say no? When we talk, I give you a different sort of idea. We talk about, let's say, the story of David and Bathsheba, this married woman who David sleeps with. Okay, she comes to the palace and David sees her bathing. I think he was on the roof, not she was on the roof. Sorry to Leonard Cohen and Jeff Buckley and everybody else who's covered the song. He was on the roof. That's symbolism. You're on the roof, you fall down. She's not on the roof. She's bathing. He sees her, he calls her into her house. And he, even though she knows, he's been told she's a married woman, she's off limits. And David sleeps with her. Is she a willing participant? It's hard to say she's a willing participant when he's the king. He's the king. What choice does she have in the matter? I don't know. I can't say, but it doesn't seem like women have much of a choice in that, and how whether or not the Jewish people have much of a choice here. Kafa aleim har kigigid. God placed the mountain over them like a bathtub and said, you really do not have a choice here. This is what's going to happen to you, whether you like it or not. This is something that you have no choice. So I don't know if you want to come back or please.
I think that I like the way that you have laid out the way that it's explored. And the thing that kept coming back into my mind as you were describing this, both the initial encounter where it was perhaps coercion, and then this turn that they're describing here to during the time of Ahasuerus and willingly taking on the burden. I actually cut us off one sentence too early. With the Jews ordained to take upon themselves and upon their seed and upon all such join themselves into them. With this idea, are you familiar with Mordecai Kaplan's Jews Under Freedom, Judaism Under Freedom, or Reconstructing Judaism?
Not the details therein.
Sure. Mordecai Kaplan wrote these books in a very interesting time, which was the late 20s, early 30s in America. And it was following the final waves of Jewish emancipation in Europe, as well as, of course, in America. And this was long before the Civil Rights era and things like that, of course. But it was still a time when Jews could finally choose to not be Jewish. There was enough legal protection, there was enough structure in place that two major, one incentive and one barrier were removed. What he describes is Jews can choose not to be Jewish and still exist in society and not be murdered for it. And the second is, as their lives improved, the appeal of Olam Haba, which is very prominent throughout all medieval and early modern Judaism, starts to go away. If this life isn't so bad, you're not so eager to move on to the next one. And if this life's not so bad, you're not so eager to see your enemies punished and things like that. And so that's really one of the core things that he explores in the early sections of those works is Jews choosing to be Jewish despite the fact that they don't have to. And I was seeing that parallel here, that I feel like oscillate in time between these two poles of Jews choosing to be Jewish and Jews being forced to be Jewish. And growing up, the Jews that, I can't speak for all Jews, but many Jews felt like they were choosing to be Jewish. No one was forcing them to. And over the last few years, we're almost seeing that rebound back to people choosing whether or not you're Jewish, whether you like it or not. And it would be interesting to see how that sort of
people being forced to be Jewish. Is that what you mean?
In the sense that if you are Jewish, there may be people across college campuses or in various parts of the UK, if you saw the recent news there, where it doesn't matter to them whether or not you are a halakhic, following Jew.
Or if you love the state of Israel or not.
None of that matters. You're a Jew because they say you're a Jew.
I heard a cute word that was used the first time on a podcast. It's not about a cute thing, but I heard somebody describe what went on campuses as the tentifada, which I thought was a very clever phrase, the tentifada. So but yeah, I think there is that sense in the source here. Now, from a traditional Jewish background, traditional Jewish idea, we have mitzvot. Mitzvot are not choices. Mitzvot are not good deeds. Some of them are good deeds. Mitzvot are commandments, things that we are bound to do. And what God is doing here to the people, one way is he's binding the people to do the mitzvot. And at the same time, God is binding the people to do the mitzvot. Are they agreeing to it willingly or not. And there's a very suggestive, the Maharal, you mentioned Prague before, and Maharal, famous of Prague, and today a tourist attraction there, and go to Prague and see the tourist attractions and all that, and visit his grave. Maharal was a very intriguing thinker, employed a lot of different types of techniques in his way of thought, but he says something that's deeply disturbing about this text, where he talks about how there's a rule in the Torah, and this is why you'll find it deeply disturbing, that if a man rapes a woman, the man needs to marry the woman. Now, that was a result of the time period, and excuse the phrase, the damaged goods that she was, the inability of her to support herself in any way, and thus he needs to marry her. Now, I will say that she does have the right of refusal. He does not have the choice. She would have the choice. And the Maharal actually compares this piece of Talmud, he understands it through that way, that God, as it were, raped the Jewish people and then is forced to marry them. It's
brought them out of Egypt. He's done the crime.
He did bringing out of Egypt is the good thing, but this is forceful, because what he tries to say is, if you force somebody, going back to this metaphor, this halacha involving the rape, and again, that's not something that we continue to do or to practice anymore today. That's an ancient rule, an ancient law, but the idea that a forced relationship is a binding one. And he sees the Jews here, in a sense, unless I'm mixing and making it backwards, but I don't think so, as almost partially victims here. And that God is binding God's self to the Jewish people. You might not listen later on, and we might have a sort of divorce at times and go in our separate ways, but I can never cast you off completely, because I have bound myself to you by forcing myself upon you. You can refuse, I can't refuse. And so changes the relationship. Again, it's a disturbing image, right, but it says a lot in terms of A, the image, B, the power, again, like the King David, Bathsheba, the power dynamic that's going on there. Do the Jews really have choice in the matter? Is part of, at the heart of the question that the rabbis are asking her here and bringing up this image. Do they really have choice in the matter? Even when it seems to be Na'aseh v'nishma, do they really have choice in the matter? If you're at work and your boss, who determines whether you keep your job or whether you get a bonus or whatever else it is, tells you to do something that is grunt work, and is a week before that determination is going to come out, do you really have a choice as to whether or not to do that? You do, because you can quit, but the repercussions obviously are immense. Could be catastrophic. Exactly. You're up for the promotion, you're up for this, you're up for the bonus, this is right, whatever it might be. So the Jewish people's choice here is a very difficult question. And then that's going to come to, again, digging deeper, the Achashverosh time period. God is no longer interacting with the world according to Judaism in a way that would be oppressive or could be destabilizing. God is in the background. Megillat Esther, the one book in scripture where God is absent. God's name is not there. God is in the background. Who is moving the story forward? People. Mordechai endangering the Jewish people, Haman being crazy, and despite the fact that he has everything, wanting to destroy the entirety of the Jewish people rather than the one guy who disobeys him. Mordechai pushing Esther to go and speak to Achashverosh. God is in the background. The book of Esther represents that transformation, that transition in time, where now the people in charge of Torah and in charge of Judaism is not God. It is the people. And one more thing with that, that's what's so intriguing. And I mentioned before, this Maggid of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rav Yosef Karo's Magid goes against, in many ways, this transformation, a transformation that says it is our Torah. We are going to make the laws. We are going to do these things. We're not getting it from you anymore, God. And it comes back to this. It's a long citation here, but go ahead, please.
So we're going to skip a little forward because I know we're a little bit behind time to the second Chavruta block here, because I know, I think, let me not skip too far, one moment, that we actually discussed something that you're alluding to in terms of the oven of Akina, I believe. I'm just trying to check
on
here.
Page 9, the middle of page 9.
Okay, so we're going to bypass Deuteronomy 5:3 for a moment and jump to 5:9. And I'll pass it to you.
So this is a story from the Talmud. It's known as the Tanur Shel Achnai, the oven of Achnai. It's a story where the rabbis have a debate about whether or not an oven can be made ritually pure without the details therein. And the rabbis all have one opinion, and Rabbi Eliezer has a different opinion. Generally, the way Jewish law works is there are two different questions. You could say the question of who is more accurate versus what does the majority say. Here, the majority said one thing. Rabbi Eliezer said the other. He's not able to prove to them logically that he is correct, and the majority is against him. So they rule the day rather than him. And then Rabbi Eliezer starts to perform all sorts of miracles. He gets a carob tree, is uprooted and runs 100 cubits or 400 cubits. And the rabbis say, I don't care about a carob tree. That doesn't matter to me. And he said, if the law is like me, then the water will run in the opposite direction instead of going north to south, other than the Nile, right? It's going to go south to north. It's going to move away from flowing towards the sea, and the water does that. It flows in the opposite direction. And the rabbis say, Jewish laws is not given to the streams. I don't care about the streams. And he says, if the law is like me, the walls of the study hall will start to cave in. They start to cave in, and then they stop and don't cave in too much, out of respect to Rabbi Eliezer because he asked them, but also out of respect to the other rabbis who seemingly for the walls to cave in on them. And I don't think he meant to cave on them completely. That wouldn't work. And they said, we don't care about the walls. And finally, he says to them, and this is on page 10 and number 4, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. A divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion? That's what the voice from heaven comes out and tells them, like Rabbi Yosef Karo's Magid, Rabbi Yosef Karo's other supernatural sort of being. And what happens is, number 5, Rabbi Yeshua stands on his feet. He's posturing and he's standing up and he's being strong. And I can't tell you if Rabbi Yeshua was tall.
It's supposed to be a hunchback, I think.
So, okay. So he's standing up on his feet. Thank you. I appreciate it. And he says, Lo bashamayim. The Torah is not in the heavens. What is it? Why is it telling us Lo bashamayim, that the Torah is not in the heavens? And he cites an opinion of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Once the Torah was given at Sinai, we no longer listen to the divine voice. It was given to us, and the rule is the majority rules the day. The majority of rabbis believe X. Your opinion is Y. We do not care if God says you're right, because it's not about, in a sense, who is right. It's about what we think, and we are the majority. And it's this lots of questions and lots of layers of this piece of Talmud. For us, part of what it's demonstrating is the movement from the Sinai destabilizing experience where the Jews are terrified and worried, and the Torah is given to them and forced upon them, to the ownership of it. It is now ours. We will determine what we believe is correct. what we believe is right. Let me make one comment related to this, and this synagogue will be better than the synagogues that I go to in it. There's a disturbing thing in this week's Parsha, in Parshat Emor for the modern mind. It talks about priests, and it talks about Kohanim who have what's called mumin, which means a blemish. So if a Kohen is blind or has some sort of leg problem or limps or a broken arm or sort of that lists a number of different mumim, the priest is not allowed to serve in the temple. They're still allowed to eat foods that were restricted to the priest and the priestly family, but it's saying, but you're not allowed to serve in the temple. And all sorts of explanations have been given, and the basic idea and the majority of the explanations is it's too distracting. The people are going to look and say, instead of thinking about God and thinking about the temple and thinking about holiness and sanctity and living a moral life, they're going to be looking at the hunchback and saying they're going to get lost in that image. But it's deeply disturbing. And the only thing that brings me comfort in a way, and I think that's what's important here, is that over time, what has happened, we have moved in a direction. I'm not saying we don't have a temple, we don't have priests offering sacrifice, but we have moved in a direction to say, as a community, different communities, that people who were not be allowed under these categories will be allowed. A person who's blind can go get an aliyah. The move towards male-female egalitarianism, the move, what is that all about? Right? And even in the more ultra-Orthodox community, I can say in all, but there'll be children with Down syndrome who legally, according to American law, are not considered adults. According to Jewish law, are not considered adults. But when they turn 13, if they're a boy, they get called up for a bar mitzvah, because we're trying in all sorts of different ways, moving to a place that we are all part of the Torah, and that God might have said 3,000 years ago, this was the way that it was.
Right.
But 2,000 years ago, and 1,500 years ago, and 500 years ago, and last week, and today, and tomorrow, and next week, we are moving things in a certain direction. We're going to move away from saying, you are blind, so you are lesser. There are interesting questions that have been asked and people have written about in the further research, questions of, can you read from a Braille Torah? A Torah is written, and the halacha is, it's the written Torah. You're supposed to read from it. Even if you know it by heart, you have to actually read the words. What about a blind person reading from a Braille Torah? Is that allowed? Isn't that considered reading? It's a different type of reading. And so the point is, what's being said here is so significant because it's the transformation over time. Go ahead. I spoke for a long time.
No, I think that was excellent. And I'll steal the mic back for just a second. The idea of physical blemishes, as you're describing, the more obvious sort of things that can arise, always intrigue me, because so I actually am a type 1 diabetic. So I carry around a disability inside me. And none of the laws that I've ever come across in the Torah, even though we knew about diabetes in ancient Egypt, actually one of the earliest documented juvenile diseases outside of infant mortality, they knew about the symptoms of it even back then. It's fascinating, but it's not obvious on the surface. And so this can be something where it's illegal for a type 1 diabetic to drive when their blood sugar is too low or too high because they're actually impaired. But the laws don't cover diabetics. So one question would be, should they or shouldn't they? And fundamentally, it seems, if following some of the Rambam, one of the idea of hidden disabilities always intrigues me, because one of the other things that has bothered me for a long time about the majority rule opinion, and maybe I'm slightly biased by the current state of affairs in this country, but the majority often has opinions that are shaped by the knowledge and experiences they have that may not necessarily be the best informed experience or knowledge. And I think of, in whether it's halakha or anything else in Jewish conversations, even if the majority rules one way, it seems like we need to go with it. And so then the question is, I haven't seen too much in rabbinic literature, rabbinic gerrymandering, where you start trying to draw things and say that doesn't come. But in the modern age, I do see it a lot across the movements, where Rabbi so-and-so says, I agree, I hold by the opinion of this, but not by the opinion of that. And so it can really create division in communities when you start saying not everyone's opinion counts. But on the flip side, if every ignoramus, you shouldn't tolerate a bore, I think is what it says in the sayings of our father. If every ignoramus with an opinion makes the opinion, do you have to follow it? So I'd be curious, as someone who's more halachic than I am.
I don't know. I don't want to go down that road.
That's
Right,
too much,
but I don't think we should. There are a lot of ignoramuses, and we live in an era today, of course, where everybody has a microphone. I saw somebody online, Facebook or somewhere yesterday, complaining about being treated improperly and being accused of hating Jews, and all he did was X, Y, and Z. And I had some conversation with the hospital and this and that. It was a doctor, and the only thing that I thought is, you're a doctor. Why aren't you taking care of patients? Why are you turning to a platform of social justice? You want to do social justice? Okay, go do nice things. Go do surgery for kids with, I don't know, cleft palates in Africa or something. I don't remember what kind of physician he was exactly,
Sure.
but everybody has a voice and something that they can say, which they can get out to the world for better or worse. The rabbis disagree, and at times they talk about the milchamta shel Torah, that it was like a battle in a war. And I'm not talking about a sort of a physical battle, but it was serious, and they were at each other's throats to try to understand. But generally, it was not about the opinion of the many. It was a small group, for better and worse, whose opinion was valued. The person on the street, this wasn't every man and every woman gets a vote. This was a certain group of select people based upon their wisdom, more than, let's say, how much money they had in their bank accounts, that had a say. Now, of course, you were at an advantage if you had a lot of money in your bank account and you were born, because then you had more time to study and less time to have to, I don't know, be a tanner or a blacksmith or something else that would have taken up your time. But coming back into here a little bit, is we have part of the question we wanted to ask is, does revelation stop at Sinai? What do the Jewish people get? And the truth is, the experience of Sinai stops at Sinai, but it's a mistake to not think of, and I'm not saying that you did this, know this, it's a mistake to not understand that there are two parts of Sinai. There is the experience of the Aseret HaDibrot, the destabilizing experience, the Jews asking Moshe to intervene, and all that is number one, the Aseret HaDibrot spoken by God. But together with that is also Moses then going up to Sinai for 40 days to learn more of the details. Now, whether that's some sort of maximalist opinion that God told Moshe, you heard me say this a week ago about the laws of an electric car, or God said to Moshe, this is my book, and now you're going to analyze them, and it's two methods of analysis. Either way, God gives Moshe something, according to our tradition, that then empowers us to take on the law. That the law does not just belong to God. The written Torah is what God wrote, but now we have this other piece, this oral Torah, which is given to us, and it's not in the heavens. It's here on earth, and God is not destabilizing us through the experience. We are driving the bus, and we are going to drive, whether it's a bus or a chariot or a 747, whatever it might be, in the direction that we think is right. And so it's I don't know if sort of revelation stopped or didn't stop, but the way that our tradition understands things is revelation is not necessarily important anymore, because we're not living in a system of revelation. And the Talmud has a line, it says, and then again, the rabbis are writing it, and they say, Chacham adif menavi. The wise person, the scholar, is greater than the prophet, which is a strange phrase. I don't know. Maimonides was a great scholar, but he wanted to be a prophet. Right? That sounds better. Get the direct word from God. Understand fully what's going on here. But the rabbis understand we're transitioning, we're moving away from prophecy, and that's better, because we're the adults, we're the decision makers. We're not the children getting told what to do by God, or the sort of the childish answer of Na'aseh v'nishma, I trust you blindly. A smart adult doesn't really trust people blindly. They, like Fox News tells them, they have to verify. So we have a real important transition here of human interpretation. If Sinai is the moment where God pushes us, it has to be understood that it works together with this oral Torah, and the oral Torah being us, the Jews, driving the bus. Us, like this, I heard about, I haven't read it, but a woman who I know who wrote a whole long article. She has a blind daughter, about how a blind person can, according to Jewish law, read from a Braille Torah. That's the direction we're moving in. And there are many others. I'm just in that because of this whole question of, like I said in this week's parsha, the handicaps and the movement, and then those people are disqualified, where we're saying we're trying to move away from that.
Which is great. And I think that, at least in my opinion, it's great. And I think that one notion that I know we've come to in some of our courses here is about the B'Tselem Elohim, right? That if the blind person is also made in the image of God, then it would be odd to say that God's self couldn't experience God's commandments. And there's a self-fulfilling kind of thing there to say, if we actually consider, it comes up frequently with women and men and those in between, of if we're all in the image of God, we have to respect that you are God in part, and I am God in part, and so are each of they. And recognizing that godliness in others is really one way to go forward without having to worry about the old categories. For me personally, I know I'm in a little bit of a different camp, but I do feel like I try to live by the past has a vote, not a veto of Mordecai Kaplan.
Yeah.
Because it really is a way of continuing the innovative mindset of Judaism without ignoring that the past got us here.
I came across a wonderful idea a number of weeks back. There's a mitzvah called Trumat Hadeshen, removing the ash from the fire. And I saw this wonderful idea that talks about how it was a mitzvah. It's kind of like taking out the garbage, and you would remove the ash so you could start a new fire. But the removal of the ash was seen as an honor for a priest to do. And then you would and then you'd be able to have a new fire from the new sacrifices. And then I forget who says it, but it was a wonderful idea that basically was like, we have to trust the past and treat it with a certain amount of respect. This is the ash from yesterday's sacrifices.
Right.
So we're not just going to blow it, and we're going to treat it with respect. But at the same time, we don't just leave it on the fire. We have to make room for a new fire. We have to make room for new ideas and innovation and growth. And that's what Judaism, I think a big piece of it is. And it's a real transition in terms of our religion and our people. I don't know if we're going to get through all of these sources, which is okay.
No, I think in fact that, looking at a quick time check, hopping to the final page on page 11 with this idea from Pirkei Avot. So I'll read briefly so that we can dive in a bit into this final one, because I think it's a good transition to prepare us for the discussion we'll have in 2 weeks as we move forward. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, every day a bot kol, the heavenly voice, goes forth from Mount Horeb and makes the proclamation and says, woe unto humankind for their contempt towards the Torah. For whoever does not occupy himself with the study of Torah is called Nazuf. As it is said, like a gold ring in the snout of a pig is a beautiful woman bereft of sense. Lovely imagery. And it says, the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tablets. Read not graven, but freedom. For there is no free man, but the one that occupies himself with the study of Torah. And whoever regularly occupies himself with the study of Torah, he is surely exalted. As is said, from Matana to Nahaliel, and Nahaliel to Bamot. And I'm sure the Hebrew play on words is much more entertaining if you want to dive into it.
Yeah, it's not that much more entertaining. It's the word cherut and charut. Charut means to engrave, and cherut means freedom. You know, part of what we need to remember about this and sources such as this is I come from a religious Orthodox background, went to Jewish schools my whole life. The rabbis and teachers, whether I wanted to hear it or not, were teaching us Torah. We didn't think of it as freedom. But if we can think back to, let's say, Tevye, who is working hard, was he a dairy farmer, a farmer, or this, that, I don't know. What does he say? Studying Torah is the sweetest thing for him. That's what he wishes. If I were a rich man, right? That's what he would do day and night. It represents doing something that is enriching, ennobling, refines your character, makes you more intelligent, makes you more worldly, improves hopefully your world, and in doing so, you help improve the world generally. And so when the rabbis talk about the tablets here, they give you freedom, the person who occupies himself or herself with the study of Torah. And the other piece of it is that, again, every day there is a voice that comes, that God's voice seemingly continues to come out from Choreth and say, why are you wasting your time doom scrolling? Why are you wasting your time doing this and doing that? And I visited a relative of mine a number of months back who grew up together, is from a very wealthy family, and he works in the family business and whatnot, but he's been able to pursue a number of different other things in his life. And part of it has to do with he's smart and he's talented and he's dedicated in what he wants to do. But a big piece of it is he doesn't have to worry about having food on the table. And that's the dream here, is the Torah is there. And if you have the opportunity to transcend the worries of your life and the necessities and the obligations of your life and move forward, you'll see that it's there, and you'll see it gives you freedom and upward mobility, not upward mobility in a class system, but upward mobility, hopefully, in a moral sense. And the shame of the people ignoring the Torah is not a sense of a lack of obedience. It's a sense of a lack of aspiration and understanding what this is in theory supposed to do for us and how it can enrich our lives in so many different ways. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go with the source.
No. I like it a lot, because one of the things we've been talking about as we're continuing to grow our adult ed programs across these organizations is exploring meeting the community where they are, because you and I may have a lot of fun, and obviously the folks joining us have a lot of fun diving into some of the minutia of the text and the Torah and what it means and trying to bring it into our world. But there are other folks who want to know, what does it mean to be a Jewish businessman? What does it mean to be a Jewish scientist or a Jewish physician or a Jewish artist? How do you express your Judaism through your performance in life or parenting? And just that idea that with the voice coming out of Horeb every day, there's a chance to say, when you come up to those ethical dimensions, if you're anchored in this Jewish foundation, whether it's the experiential one like we talked about at the beginning, or ideally some at least anchor points along the text to say, how do I act in the appropriate way so that you're not so much a Bernie Madoff? It's a little bit, maybe that's an extreme example, but they're worse. Yeah. Oh yes. I'm thinking of certain directors and producers, but just the idea that the text, I think we skipped over the piece, but we touched upon it a little bit. It's not in heaven, right? It is with you every day. And that idea that in one form of full observance, you can follow the instructions in the Shulchan Aruch down to the tying of your shoes and whether the left or the right goes on first in the pant leg. Or you can go on the other extreme and say, the way I'm getting up in the morning is I'm putting a smile on my face with Modeh Ani, and then I'm going to hug my children, and I'm moving into the day to start serving others. And I think that both are acceptable in a way, but it gets to that notion that every day there's a chance to hear the voice and have that experience and integrate it into whatever part of your life you're in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to conclude with. And I'll say in a similar notion, and this week we read the verse, V'niktashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, that I'll be sanctified through the Jewish people. And generally, when we refer to that verse, we refer to it as the verse through which we have martyrdom. The Kedoshim, those who died because or were murdered because they were Jewish in the Holocaust, Rabbi Akiva and his horrific story of martyrdom, and others. But I once heard from a rabbi, I don't remember the full context, and I can't remember the rabbi other than he was from Israel. And I don't remember if he said it to me in Hebrew or English, but what he said was, dying al pi kiddush Hashem, as it's saying, dying upon through the sanctification of the name of God is very difficult. But the real challenge is not dying al pi kiddush Hashem, but living al pi kiddush Hashem, that living every single day with these commandments and teachings, and not, and hearing, like you're saying, hearing that voice from heaven that comes out of Chorev every single day, and allowing that to be part of the way that guides, or the entire way that guides our lives and our behaviors. And that is less about the Jews and the way we're moving Torah and our ownership of Torah, but going back to that past experience, this destabilizing experience, this scary experience. And I can't say everybody in life, but a lot of people act more proper out of fear than they do for other reasons. So I don't know if it's connecting back to that aspect. Either way, it's supposed to be ennobling, enabling, and enriching is a big piece of it. So I appreciate it if you have the last thing to say, or if any of those of you online have anything to say or anything to add. If not, we will call it an evening.
Yes, and we will resume in 2 weeks as we continue to prepare for the big night of Tikkun Leyl Shavuot. Then we'll hopefully have 2 additional classes, and we can continue to explore these ideas and what it means to stay up all night and study. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thank you to Dr. Swafford and Rabbi Gitler for your insights. Please join us in 2 weeks on Wednesday, May 13th from 7 to 8:30 p.m., either online or in person, as we explore the second topic of this series, Torah study, discovery or creation. We look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks, and to seeing and hearing from you via email, YouTube, comments, or any of the other ways you can reach us. Thank you again for joining us this evening. Good night.